So, how often when you're practicing do you experience getting caught in some imagined scene, right? Yep, I see hands already. Some conversation, some interaction, some situation that you're imagining and the mind brings you to, maybe in the future or the past. Yeah. So, some examples, maybe you start wondering if your partner did the thing that they agreed to do, and you start imagining they didn't do it and the conversation you're going to have with them. Maybe you're picturing an event that's going to happen with a family member who's challenging for you, and you're sort of like, here's what they're going to say, and here's what I'm going to say, and then they're going to do this and I'm going to do this. Maybe your mind takes you to someplace in the future, like a hopeful, amazing fantasy, something you're going to eat or do, some sensual pleasure that you get kind of hooked into. Or worrying about some imagined situation, right? What if this happens? How am I going to manage it? Here's what I'll do, and sort of repeating that. Or many of us get caught replaying a scene from the past, going back over it again and again, what we said or did, what we felt, wishing we did something differently, right? This is really, really common. And we get stuck in our practice a lot. And a lot of people will acknowledge it. They'll say, like, I know that I'm doing it. I see it. I kind of step away for a moment, but then I'm back in and I'm back in. And so, why would we talk about this when we're focusing on the precepts, right? This is kind of happening in our mind. Um, and I thought, I was thinking about the third precept, abstaining from the misuse of sensual sexual energies. I thought maybe I would talk more about the pervasiveness and the potency of sensual fantasy, but I really wanted to expand that and just talk more about this phenomenon in general, because I know that I experience it a lot. I get stuck in it a lot, just like in some scene. There's maybe some emotion it's tied to, some aversion, some wanting, and I just can't stop it. And, coming back again to, like, why would we focus on this when we're focusing on sila? We know that when we're caught in those scenes and rehearsals, we're really creating and even getting attached to a reality that isn't quite true. It's certainly not here and now. It's usually pretty narrow and tight. We're not really seeing ourselves or others in the clearest or most spacious view. And it really has a deep impact on how we feel and the tendency of the mind. And so we want to be aware of, what are we conditioning the mind to practice? With these stories, right? What habits or grooves are we deepening in the mind? Are they the grooves of metta, clear seeing, spaciousness? Or are they the sort of grooves of aversion, wanting, fear, worry, doubt? The Buddha said, whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. Whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. And I appreciate the word inclination, right? I can sort of feel that movement, that leaning in, the groove that the water then just flows right down into when we're caught in those kind of compulsive fantasies and scenarios. And we know that Vipassana practice is so much about seeing causes and conditions. This leads to that domino effect. And on our cushion, we can see how fast that can happen, right? There may be just a moment of unpleasant, and suddenly we're in aversion, and then we're reminded of something, and then we're in a conversation with someone and angry with them. And then if we see them later that day, watch out. So it's fast. And I really appreciate this quote, that whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. the inclination of our minds becomes the motivation behind our actions in the world. And in the Dhammapada, the Buddha really says this pretty clearly. He says, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never departing shadow. And there's that connection there, right? Inclination of the mind leads to action. And this is sila. This is sila. And so, how can we notice the potency and the pull, the magnetic pull of these stories and scenes we get pulled into? Of course, we want to slow it down, right? And we want to notice and name it. That gentle labeling that we often practice, right? Oh, thinking, arguing, worrying, anticipating, planning. That can help slow things down a little bit. Enough sometimes that we can release the line of the content and come back maybe to the anchor of the body and the breath and kind of continue our practice. Sometimes that's not enough though. Sometimes we're just pulled back in. And so just some other handholds we might consider. While we certainly don't want to get caught in the content, we may ask ourselves, what is the version of the people that I'm kind of perpetuating in this scene? You know, is it a total caricature of someone or of myself? Is there, like, are we really seeing our vulnerability, our strengths, our wholeness, and another's wholeness? This is that potential to incline toward Brahmavihara practice, widening the lens, widening the heart a little bit. And on the flip side, and I found this kind of funny actually, there are a couple of pieces where monks and nuns would share that when they got really caught in lust, when they were really attracted to someone, on the cushion, they would remind themselves that that person's body was made of blood and pus and bones. And one nun even kind of shared that she reminded herself of all the feces in that person's body waiting to be expelled, right? And this is not to cultivate aversion, right? But both of these, that widening, is really to kind of incline the mind toward more balance, away from, to kind of loosen and shift the inclination to desire or to judgment. It's cooling the fires, right? We're not adding more wood to that. And then another option when we're really caught, especially in the content of the scene, is there something here underneath the surface waves that I kind of just am not able to hold or be with, that I'm struggling with? Some hurt or anger or fear or longing. And I think that can be a helpful move back here. And when we do that, when we kind of recognize, oh, maybe there's something here that I can be with for a little bit, often that can also be the doorway to compassion or care, or even just stillness with ourselves as we acknowledge the suffering of that kind of relentless mind, those habits, right? There can be a bit of like, wow, there's a lot of suffering in that. And can I be kind to that, to myself in that? And can I recognize everyone, struggles with this in some way? I'm not alone in this. Then there can be maybe a little bit of compassion for others as well. One kind of example for me, my mind really does this in a very kind of worried and anxious way. There's a lot of anticipatory planning and rehearsing. Here's what I'll say, here's what I'll do, here's how this conversation will go. And yet it will replay and replay, and it doesn't matter how many times I go over it. And I can notice what version of myself and others is in this, right? Usually it's this kind of me that is not capable of managing the unexpected, who's going to make mistakes. And that's really not true. That's not the fullness of who I am. And my vision of others in those kind of scenes are people who are so much less forgiving than the actual people in my life. Right? Like it's felt as such a threat when in reality it's not the case. And then I can slow down also and really kind of check what is underneath all this. And usually it's a lot of kind of anxiety, stress, fear, self-doubt. And then I have the opportunity, can I breathe with that? Can I appreciate the mind that's trying to protect me from that by spinning these stories again and again? And can I be with like the leaning in and the tension and the shallow breath of that, right? Then I can come back a little more to how it shows up here. And then can I recognize the suffering of that in me? How it adds actually to stress. And again, then, right, I'm not alone in that. Everyone has to face uncertainty, the unknown. Everyone's mind kind of spins out in some way to manage that. And I can open a little bit in that. Sometimes it's easier for me to feel compassion for others than here first. And I'm guessing you all know the places where your minds tend to go. And so we can be really careful about where are we inclining the mind, noticing what the mind is pursuing, noticing where we get hooked. And as Susan says, a big star for mindfulness when we notice each time. Doesn't matter if we notice it 100 times in a sitting. We learn to drop the story, widen the lens, widen the view and the heart, and notice and care for the suffering of getting stuck. And so let's practice as much as we can, inclining the mind to a little more ease, a little more wisdom, a little more compassion. So thank you so much. Thanks for your attention.